Alright, starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Chair, in today's world, globalization has been one of the main forces driving industrialization in most countries. From gainful employment to increased production, most success of industries stems from trade relations. Isolated countries are at a much higher risk given that they are still developing. They need to maintain relations that they can rely upon. Do we think that globalization would exist to the extent that it does in our world? In their world? Absolutely not. We feel imposing such tariffs disincentivizes countries to engage in free trade, and we feel that the benefits of globalization far outweigh any menial tax that a country would pay that could have little to no effect on the overall structural and infrastructural development of the country. Side proposition fundamentally lost this debate when they failed to recognize that without a proper structure in place, without a strong basis, and without additional support, no industry can flourish in a country. There needs to be an example, a structure for the smooth functioning of the economy. To win this debate, essentially, proposition needed to prove to you beyond sufficient doubt that A, such restrictions and tariffs would produce tangible, immediate benefits that can be reaped by society as a whole. 2, that they would decrease structural unemployment and also increase productivity. And 3, they would ultimately result in better quality of products. They failed to do either of these. All we have to do is disprove any one of these points and we take this debate. I'm going to be doing 3 things in my speech today. Number 1, rebutting the points brought out by prop. 2, bringing you a new argument from side opposition. And 3, I'm going to take prop at their very best and still show you why our world is better. So let's start with our characterization. What does our world look like? Number 1, we propose a world that can facilitate free trade, where there are no boundaries or restrictions or implications on trade activities between countries. Number 2, we will initiate a panel with the UN to ensure the enforcement of this law with no infringement. Thirdly, we have strict rules that adhere to labor laws and the percentage of market coverage that will be given to imports to prevent overflooding of the market in coordination with the statistic reports and their overall economic development. We don't think it's fair for us to defend the burden of violation of labor laws, as that is equally probable on both sides of the house. Moving on to what we got from side proposition. The first thing we get from them is the idea that developing countries are such because developed countries put them in this position. 3 responses. Number 1, yes, we agree that colonialism exploited the country, but that still doesn't explain why proper laws and policies can't lead to a mutual transaction by trade. Number 2, when the British in India did set up the cotton industry, they managed to accelerate it successfully, given that their main aim was to import it to Britain. Now assume that there were some policies that prevented them from doing so. They had the ability to set up successful industries to accelerate the economy, which is our main aim in our debate today. Secondly, on how they believe that only their side accelerates growth. Number 1, we believe that increased industrialization, urbanization, employment is a far more tangible benefit than a tax that you can pay, which might not even go into improving the country's infrastructure and economy. Second, this is much more appreciable on our side of the house, as we also have healthy competition that causes local producers and industries to scale up. Thirdly, we got they gave us this argument about labor laws. Again, I don't think it's fair for us to defend this burden. So as we stated in our motion, we have a committee, and like any other law, any infringement or violation of these laws would lead to penalization and sufficient punishment. And 4, how these countries are self-reliant. 3 responses again. 1, with no foundation or base, this is highly improbable. 2, inflation and improper supply. It could also lead to inflation and improper supply, as they don't have structures and institutions to push this kind of mass production. So the very benefits that side proposition tried to claim by saying they don't have infrastructure, they don't have administration and proper administration and institutions, how do they expect them to scale up and cater to a whole country? It's highly improbable that they will be able to solely meet the demands of a huge developing country. Moving on to my constructives, I'll be answering 2 questions in this debate. Number 1, what are the implications of free trade between countries? And number 2, in which world are the people happier? So Number one, this expands the choice and quality of goods in the market. And why is this good? Two subpoints. In general, customers now have access to a more variety and hence a better quality of life. Number two, specific to developing countries, this accelerates the economy, introduces new trends, and leads to an intermixing and integration of culture. Secondly, on the price of goods in the market reduces. Now, goods can reach a much larger audience and hence the target demographic increases. Second, the number of goods being bought increases, which leads to an increase in the markets, that leads to an increase in job opportunities, that leads to an increase in facilities and leads to urbanization. Further, competition also increases, which means that local producers and sellers will now actively compete with producers from other countries. Why is this beneficial? This improves the quality of goods, production standards are raised, more number of goods are present in the market. The reason that side proposition can't claim all of these benefits is because they conceded that upon that they want to penalize developed countries for their historical actions and their perpetrations, but at the point at which you impose a tariff, you're indirectly condemning any sort of trade, and as I've already stated, you will be less inclined to engage in free trade, and hence these benefits that I just mentioned are exclusive to side opposition only. On to my second question, in which world will the people be happier? Number one, employment. With the criteria set in place and with emerging trends of globalization, we're able to gainfully employ large sections of society. This employment is initiated by both international and local companies, which leads to increased productivity and economic prosperity. This reduces the incidence of underemployment, like in a country like India, where a large number of people initially were employed in the primary sector and a lot of them weren't gainfully employed. But with a shift, with increase in trade from countries, there will also be a shift of occupations to the secondary sector, and which helps in development. There would also be more resources, industries would flourish, and trade relations with these countries would actually help them in the long run. Now, what do we look like in our worst case? Even if we take side proposition at their best, we still won this debate because we were able to show you how the quality of life of people significantly increases on our side. Two, they still weren't able to prove to you how the tax paid by developed countries would actually bring about tangible benefits in the life of common citizens. And three, they didn't show you how this develops the